Picture this. It's the year 1166. You're standing at the edge of a muddy track somewhere in the English Midlands, watching a small, noisy market come to life. Cattle are being herded through a triangular patch of open ground that will one day become the bull ring. Traders are shouting. Smoke is drifting from iron forges. And running somewhere beneath all of it, or rather, running right through it, is the filth and waste of daily life. Welcome to Birmingham. Or more accurately, welcome to what Birmingham used to be before anyone thought seriously about what happened to all that mess. The story of how a modest medieval settlement became one of the most industrialized cities on earth is well told. But the story of where people washed, where they went to the toilet, and what happened to that waste, that story is far less glamorous, far more dangerous, and honestly far more fascinating. When the de Birmingham family took lordship of this patch of Warwickshire around 1150, the land had one enormous natural advantage that made it worth settling at all: springs. Lots of them. The geology here, porous sandstone ridges pressing against impermeable rock, meant water simply bubbled up from the ground along the River Rea Valley. For the first few hundred years of Birmingham's existence, those springs were everything. People drank from them, cooked with them, watered their animals from them. Life revolved around them. But drinking water and wastewater were very different problems, and nobody in the 1100s or 1200s had worked out how to truly separate the two. What you got instead was cesspits holes dug into the ground, sometimes stone-lined if you were lucky and wealthy enough to afford the stonework, into which everything went. Human waste, kitchen scraps, dead animals. All of it, in the same hole. In a town of just a few hundred people clustered around a market, this was unpleasant but manageable. The pits would fill up, and men whose profession we can only feel sorry for, called night soil men, would come and empty them under cover of darkness, carting the contents out to surrounding fields as fertilizer. The problem with that system is simple. It only works when the pit and the drinking well aren't too close to each other. And in medieval Birmingham, where houses were packed together with no planning and no rules, that distance was rarely guaranteed. Waste would seep through the soil. It would leach into the groundwater. The same springs that kept people alive were quietly being poisoned by the town's own rubbish. Nobody had the language for it yet. Germ theory was still centuries away, but the deaths were real enough. By the time the Black Death swept through England around 1350, Birmingham had grown to roughly 1,500 people. The plague tore that number roughly in half, maybe down to 500 or 600 souls. It would take another 2 centuries for the population to recover to where it had been. Now, the Black Death was spread by fleas on rats. Not by water, but rats thrived precisely in the conditions that bad sanitation created. The waste, the middens, the stagnant pools in the streets. Poor sanitation didn't cause the plague, but it built exactly the kind of environment where disaster could take hold and spread. Throughout the medieval period, the rhythm of life around waste stayed essentially the same. Cesspits, night soil men, open drains running down the centers of streets, chamber pots being emptied out of windows in the morning. The River Rea, which had drawn settlers to this spot in the first place, began collecting the runoff from all of it. It was both water source and sewer simultaneously, a contradiction that nobody had the political will or engineering capacity to resolve. Then came the Industrial Revolution, and everything got dramatically, catastrophically worse. Between 1801 and 1881, Birmingham's population exploded, from around 74,000 people to more than 500,000, all crammed into a city whose basic infrastructure had been designed for a medieval market town. The springs that had been sufficient for domestic and industrial purposes for centuries, as one contemporary account put it, were suddenly nowhere near enough. The housing that went up to absorb all these new workers has become infamous. Back-to-back houses, rows of terraces built literally back-to-back, with no rear yard, no gap for air, no space for a private toilet. Before World War I, a survey found that in Birmingham there were over 43,000 back-to-back homes and more than 27,000 houses situated in cramped internal courtyards. Staggeringly, 42,020 of the city's homes had no water supply inside the dwelling at all. and 58,028, nearly 60,000 homes, had no separate toilet of any kind. Communal privies sat in the shared yards of these courts, used by dozens of families, their waste running into communal cesspits that were perpetually overflowing. You could smell Birmingham from a distance. That isn't an exaggeration. The River Rea, the Tame, the smaller streams, threading through the city, all had become open sewers. Industry dumped chemical waste into them. Slaughterhouses drained into them. And the thousands of cesspits of a city 500,000 strong quietly seeped into the same groundwater that people were still drawing from wells. In 1826, a private company began supplying piped water, but only to those wealthy enough to pay for it. For the working poor packed into the back-to-backs, the contaminated well was still the reality. Cholera arrived in Britain in 1831. It came back in 1848. Then again in 1854. Each time, it targeted the places with the worst water and the worst sanitation most brutally. It killed without mercy, and it killed fast. A person could be fine at breakfast and dead by nightfall. Typhoid, dysentery, and scarlet fever ran alongside it in a constant, grinding toll on working-class life that history books tend to flatten into statistics, but which, street by street and court by court, was absolutely devastating. Change, when it came from one of the most remarkable civic politicians Britain has ever produced. Joseph Chamberlain became mayor of Birmingham in 1873, and what he did in the years that followed was nothing short of a revolution in how a city thought about itself. He understood something that his predecessors had not. That clean water was not a luxury or a private commodity. It was the foundation on which everything else depended. In 1876, he bought out the private Birmingham Waterworks Company for £1,350,000, a figure that in today's money comes to well over £195 million, and placed the water supply under public control. His reasoning was blunt. "We have not the slightest intention of making profit," he said. "We shall get our profit indirectly in the comfort of the town and in the health of its inhabitants." From 1851 onwards, newly built houses in Birmingham were being connected to a proper sewerage system, though crucially, even that system simply piped the effluent down to the River Rea below the town, which meant the river continued to suffer. And the rollout was deeply uneven. The town center and wealthier suburbs got their sewer connections in the 1,850 seconds. Working-class neighborhoods in Birmingham had to wait until the 1,870 seconds and 1,880 seconds. The people most at risk from contaminated water were consistently the last to receive protection from it. But Chamberlain's municipal waterworks was only the beginning of the story, because by the 1,880 seconds and 1,890 seconds, it was becoming devastatingly clear that Birmingham itself had simply run out of viable local water. The springs were overwhelmed. The wells were compromised. The growing city needed a solution on a completely different scale. The answer was Wales. Engineers surveying the Elan and Elan valleys in mid-Wales identified something extraordinary. A series of narrow glaciated valleys carved from impermeable mudstone, receiving nearly 3 times Birmingham's annual rainfall, and crucially sitting at an elevation 171 feet above Franklin Reservoir on the outskirts of Birmingham. No pumps needed. The water could flow entirely under gravity, 73 miles through tunnels, pipelines, and brick aqueducts at a pace of about 2 miles an hour, taking a day and a half to complete the journey. Parliament passed the Birmingham Corporation Water Act in 1892. Construction on the Elan Valley dams began in 1893, employing 50,000 workers over the course of the project. On 21 July 1904, King Edward VII and Queen Alexandra opened the completed system. Clean, uncontaminated water from the Welsh hills was now flowing to Birmingham on a scale that had never been possible before. The city's death rate from waterborne diseases began to fall. It was not without cost. Around 100 people living in the Elan Valley had to leave forcibly, with only landowners receiving any compensation. 44 properties were demolished, including 18 farms and a school. The communities who had lived there for generations had no say whatsoever. Birmingham's gain was, for those Welsh communities, an irreversible loss. But even with Elan Valley water arriving in the city, the transformation of daily life inside Birmingham's homes was painfully slow. By the time the First World War ended, tens of thousands of houses in the city still had no indoor water supply and no private toilet. The 1,952nd slum clearance programs began tearing down the worst of the old back-to-back courts. Birmingham demolished over 57,000 properties between 1,955 and 1,985. In their place went council houses and tower blocks, fitted with indoor plumbing, hot water, proper bathrooms. For families moving out of a court with a shared outdoor privy into a flat with its own bathroom, the effect was transformative in a way that's almost impossible to overstate. A bath, hot water from a tap, a toilet that flushed. These were not small things. A 1,967 national survey found that fully 25% of homes across England and Wales still lacked a bath or shower, an indoor toilet, a sink, or hot and cold running water. 25% in 1967. By 1991, that figure had dropped to just 1%. In the span of a single generation, something that had eluded the city for 8 centuries, a reliable, clean, private means of washing and waste disposal for every household had essentially been achieved. Today, Birmingham's water still arrives largely via that same Elan Valley aqueduct, now over 120 years old, trickling in from the Welsh hills at barely a walking pace, cleaned and treated at Frankly before flowing into taps across the city. The sewage network beneath the streets handles millions of liters of wastewater daily, feeding into treatment works that clean it before it returns to the rivers. Stand in a Birmingham bathroom today and turn on a tap. The hot water comes instantly, the shower runs clean, the toilet flushes, and the problem simply disappears. None of that happened naturally. It was earned through centuries of disease, through political will, through extraordinary feats of engineering, and through the slow, grinding recognition that clean water wasn't a privilege to be rationed to those who could pay for it.